Welcome to the Power of Owning Your Career podcast, the show for women who are seeking more fulfillment in life and simply not getting it from their current situation. We focus specifically on careers, but hey, we spend a lot of time in our careers, so making changes here will definitely create an impact in your overall happiness. I'm your host, Simone Morris, and my mission is to empower women to succeed. I believe that in order to powerfully own your career, you must decide and claim that you want to sit in the driver's seat. You must know that you deserve better and be willing to not only do the requisite work, but be willing to go out on a limb to ensure your success. Each episode focuses on profiling a leader who is clearly demonstrating ownership of their career. Join me and my guests as we explore career journeys and bring you actionable strategies to use to get into the driver's seat for your career. Because ultimately, your career is your responsibility. Let's get into the show.
Hi, everybody. It's Simone Morris. Guess what? It is season 3. I cannot believe that we are already on season 3 of the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. I am just super excited and energized from going around the country and spreading the message and seeing the growth of the podcast. Truly, it is an inspiration to me on my own career journey, and I hope it's an inspiration to you on your career journey and that you're picking up some solid tips to own your career. It is so important that you take ownership of your career journey. With that said, I want to give you a couple lessons that you can implement for your career as the year comes to an end. Can you believe it's the end of a decade? I know, I can't believe it either. Oh my goodness. Well, there are 3 things that I want you to do to really take ownership as the year comes to an end. The first thing I want to suggest to you is for you to document your goals for 2020 and beyond. Okay, don't get scared because I said and beyond. Just document your goals. I want you to be intentional about what is coming up for you in 2020. Therefore, you have to claim it, you have to document it, write it down, and go after it. So I don't want you to just be hands-off and allowing things to happen. I want you to be more intentional. I want you to be in the driver's seat and really claiming what you want in 2020. So that's the first thing. Go ahead and set some goals for 2020. The second thing I want you to do is to think about the training and support, the skills that you need in order to be successful for 2020. What is something that you need to work on? I know for me, one of the things that I want to work on in 2020 is to really amp up the assessments area of my business. And I've been thinking about outsourcing that, but I really think that I want to do more assessments for my clients. And so I'm going to be looking into doing some assessments, training, and certification in 2020. That's one thing. The other thing that I want to do is I want to continue to be successful as a small business owner. And so therefore, I am going to invest in my education for business savvy in 2020. I did that in 2019. I felt that it worked really well. And so that's a goal for me in 2020 as well. So those are some examples of me really shining a light on what training and support do I need in 2020. So I want you to do that for yourself as well. The third thing I want to ask you to do is really pump the brakes. Pump the brakes. Take some time out to celebrate what 2019 meant to you, to celebrate the goals that you have achieved in 2019, the strides that you have made, because 2019 was a rocking year. My word for 2019 was epic. And I'm going to say that again, epic, because I feel like it was an epic year. And so I already know my word for 2020. My word for 2020 is collaboration. Collaboration. I'm going to be doing a lot of collaboration in 2020. So I've got a word to sort of be my beacon for the year. That's something you can do as well. But back to the point. So I am going to take some time out to celebrate all the epic things that have happened to me in 2019. And I'll be taking the last 2 weeks of the year out for that to happen. So I just want to encourage you to celebrate your successes, and that's a part of my 7-step formula in owning owning my career, and I want to encourage you to do the same. So I'm really hoping that these strategies will help you to wrap up 2019 in a very good way. And I know that I am rooting for you. If you need tools and support, go ahead and go over to the SimoneMorrisEnterprises.org website and take a look in the store and see what can help you. Or you can always drop me a line at smorris@SimoneMorris.com. Okay? Well, without further ado, here's this week's podcast. Enjoy.
So today's episode, we have with us Valerie Gordon, who is a storytelling strategist, everybody. She is the owner and founder of a communications firm called Commander-in-Chief, which I just love that title. Valerie, how did you come up with that title? First of all, welcome to the podcast. And how did you come up with that title for your company name?
Well, first of all, thank you, Simone, so much for having me. And thank you to everyone listening today. Like you, who believes in the power of being in the driver's seat of your career, I believe in being an active author of your career. I see your career as a series of chapters in your life story and how we build on them and the narrative we create. Commander-in-Chief came about because I wanted to help women, all clients, but particularly women, with the communication skills to really take command of their career. And as a play, obviously, on words, Commander-in-Chief, think about being the own Commander-in-Chief of your career, being in the driver's seat of your career. We're very much aligned there. And decided to name the company Commander-in-Chief, given that play on words. What's interesting, though, is a number of my clients and the corporations where I speak, there are plenty of men in the room. Storytelling is a universal and gender-neutral language, and everyone can benefit from the storytelling strategies I present. But my goal really is to help empower women with the tools they need to advance their careers on their own terms.
So beautifully stated, so well aligned with my brand as well about putting women in the driver's seat for their careers. Awesome. Tell us a little bit about your award-winning background. Ladies and gentlemen, I am seeing all these Emmys behind Valerie as we have this interview. And I want to just ask you to give us some highlights about your award-winning background.
So my background for more than 20 years was in media. I was a television producer. I worked for places like HBO, CBS News, the Olympic Games, and ESPN. And those Emmys behind me in my home office are sports Emmys that I won throughout my career as a member of a team of very talented people for the different shows and features we produced. And everyone always comments on them, and everyone is always intrigued by them. But I will tell you, Simone, I believe they are the least interesting thing about me. And while I certainly appreciate having them in my past and in my background about storytelling, I'm much more interested now in the power of story and how it relates not to what we put on television, those stories that make us laugh and cry and inspire us, but how we can find the power in our own story. So what I've been able to do in my career pivot was take my background in storytelling and apply it to the regular person's life. How might we capitalize on our own personal story to advance our careers? But I will tell you that pivot moment came at a time when the story for me was not going well. In fact, everything was going wrong.
Now, was that moment a signal for you to be in the driver's seat for your career, or did you feel like you were in the driver's seat before then? Tell us about that.
Simone, I was in the driver's seat strapped into a vehicle that had like a time bomb on it that was heading off of a cliff. So I was not in the right driver's seat at that time. In fact, I wish you and I had spoken and I had been able to take advantage of your services at a time when I was really struggling to figure out what comes next in my career. So I'll take you back to that moment, and I think it's possible that some of your listeners might recognize this in their own lives. I am depleted, exhausted, and lying on the floor of my closet. It's a walk-in closet, so it's not totally weird. It's carpeted and it's a walk-in closet. So there was space for me to be in there. I was so exhausted, I could not get off the floor. And yet I felt guilty for even being there, because here I was, 20 plus years into a career that I had been told by everyone, everyone else would kill for. I had worked for it. I had won these awards. I was succeeding by everyone else's expectations of the word. I had everything I ever wanted. I was an award-winning television producer. I had this great job with this great company. I had my family. I had 2 kids, and I was exhausted and wanted none of it. And I couldn't figure out what was wrong. I was so stubborn at that time. I thought, if I just keep working a little bit harder, it will all work itself out. What I didn't realize at that time was that I was facing a major case of burnout and disillusionment, dissatisfaction. And I was unwilling to come to the conclusion that that chapter of my career story was coming to an end. And it was simply time to write a new one. I couldn't figure out why I could no longer muster the enthusiasm for what I once did and how I was going to move forward. So if I was in the driver's seat, I was in the wrong car, or I was in a car that was stuck in neutral and like spinning wheelies in the driveway. And I remember thinking to myself at that time, lying on the floor of my closet, so upset, like, this is not how the story was supposed to go. I thought I'd be running a network by the time I was 45. You know, it wasn't landing the way I thought it was supposed to. And it was almost at that moment that I realized this voice came over to me that said, but this is not how the story ends. And it was as if some clue appeared of, you've always worked as a storyteller. This is the story of your life. What are you going to do about it? So for anyone who has faced that kind of career burnout or uncertainty or dissatisfaction, yes, you can build a better next chapter. Sometimes you have to get to that point of conflict and climax in the story, which signifies the turning point. The problem for me was I didn't know what I was going to do. I had no plan and had no idea what comes next. I only knew that I could no longer stay where I was. And I'm sure in your experience as a coach, you've worked with many people who reach that point and you help them work through it.
Absolutely. I have so much to say. First of all, when I interview people, the title of their episode jumps out at me. So as you're talking, there's a couple things jumping out at me, and I grabbed my notepad and said, "Stop being stuck in neutral." That might be a great title. And then I heard the turning point. There are so many things I could relate to with the burnout. We had a guest earlier this season who talked about adrenal fatigue and just the importance of recognizing that in your career. And I absolutely felt that way after working about 15 years. Actually, it was almost 16 years. And people saying, "You've got this great job." You know, you're painting this story for me where I went to Eat, Pray, Love. I felt like I was watching or reading, because I preferred the book. I felt like I was reading Eat, Pray, Love, and like, yeah, I was there with you in the story with what you were saying. So I totally get it. So, Valerie, all that said, how did you decide to move forward from that moment? Because there's a bit of risk in walking away from things that are working so well. Tell our listeners how you make the decision to pivot and take on the risk that goes with it.
So it's exceptionally hard to do, as I'm sure you and many of your listeners know. It's why many people would rather stay stuck in that state of neutral, driving in circles, than take the chance when they don't yet have the roadmap. And I'm sure you give out many tools to your clients about how to move forward. For me, it was really taking stock of where I was and what I wanted to do next, which when we're so busy in our career lives, we don't often take the time to think about what comes next. In fact, I say the 3 biggest goal-killing words are as soon as. How often do we say to ourselves, well, as soon as I get through this big project, then I'll focus on that. As soon as I get through the holidays, then I'll go to the gym. As soon as I, get my act together, I'll put my resume together and start thinking about looking for a job. And we become stuck in this state of as soon as. So like you, titling your episodes, I start with an exercise in my workshops that I offer through Commander and She that treat you like the main character of your story. And I ask everyone, so title this current chapter of your life. And it's funny when you do this in a room, most people wind up being far more creative than they even realize. Most people will say, figuring it out, or What comes next? Question mark. Or I had one woman recently who said she was the conductor of the hot mess train. Right. And we all laugh and we all relate. So I developed my first workshop by kind of thinking about myself and where I was in my story and what was going to come next. You know, you're the central character in the story. What do you want to happen next? And I decided that I had worked so hard and for so long and was so exhausted that I had lost touch with things that really mattered to me. And so at that time, I just called my chapter Chasing Joy. And I know that sounds a little silly, but I had to get back to what is it that even makes me happy? And I started putting a list together of all the things that I knew I did well and all the things that I enjoyed and where they intersected. Now, I didn't know how my background in media would come into play, but I realized that throughout my career and at my time at one of my companies running their women's organization, that I loved mentoring and helping and providing professional development opportunities to other women. In fact, if I had to point to a clue or a moment when everything just felt right, it was when one of my employees came to me to give notice. She was leaving for a competing job. And I knew there was no way we would be able to counteroffer to keep her. But as I said, let's take a little time. Let me look into this for you. I encouraged her to go back to the person offering her this job, which was a competing TV network, and to ask for more money. And she was like, oh, I can't do that. I don't want to lose the job opportunity. You know, I've already told them I accepted. And I said, counseled her, you know, why don't you let them know that you're waiting on a counteroffer from your current employer and that you were really hoping for a starting salary, I don't know, 20% more than what they offered. And we agreed to meet the following Monday. At that time, I knew I would have no counteroffer for her, but she came into me to tell me that she had accepted, was going to take the job, and she thanked me. While she didn't feel comfortable asking for 20% more, she went back to them, she asked for 10% more, and she got it. And her starting salary was now $6,000 more than it would have been had she not asked. And I remember thinking back to that moment of this departing employee and how good it felt to give her that advice based on my experience of how to stick up for herself and to ask for what she was worth. And that $6,000, which might not seem like a lot, was now her new base, and everything that she would earn would be based off of that. So I looked for little clues in my past like that of when was I doing work that made me feel just really good? And then how do I take what I know how to do, which is put a really good story on television, and convert it into this area of how can I help other women navigate the corporate world and ascend the leadership ladder, but on their own terms. And that's when the idea for my first workshop, which is called What's Your Story? Storytelling Strategies for Success, literally started build self in my head. And it came from that chapter of Chasing Joy, which was just what makes me happy? What do I like to do? It was opening up the space for that creative reflection. When we're so busy in our lives, we don't take the time to do it. But when we do, we find that we do have the answers. Then we have to trust our instinct to act on them. Because I will tell you, leaving a corporate role, as you know, and going out on your own as an entrepreneur is an incredibly scary proposition. And it's not for everyone. I don't suggest everyone leave their jobs. I say certainly figure out a way to figure out what it is that you want and how you might get it where you are. But for me, I knew that my next chapter would be about helping others with their next chapters. And in order to do that, I needed to give it my full attention. And it was coming to the realization that that lengthy and successful chapter of my media career, it was just time to turn the page to a new one and to build what happens next.
Awesome. So what message were you telling yourself as you made that big leap?
That it was going to be uncomfortable and that discomfort was perhaps my new state. That figuring it out was part of the process and that you had to keep turning the page in order to move the storyline along. Now, I always tell people this, if you're in a good chapter of your life and things are working well and you're happy, there's no need to turn that page. You stay in that chapter as long as you want. But when you have a story driver that isn't good, dissatisfaction, disillusionment, fatigue, jealousy, conflict, whatever it is, these are excellent story drivers. They're designed to help you move your story forward. If you choose to ignore them, if you choose to just stay in them, stay in neutral, you'll just keep reading that page over and over again. So this is a message really for anyone who feels like they're not in charge of their story. Someone else is dictating it to them, or they're waiting for something to happen, or they feel like they just keep reading the same page over and over again. You actually have to change something for something to change. Now, only you can figure out what that means for you. Most people think it means massive change. I have to quit my job. I have to move across country. I have to end a relationship. When really it's the small steps, those small micro actions we make that can change the story. So I mentioned everything I do is based on storytelling and different story genres. And I tell all my clients there are 3 essential elements to any story. We have character. You're the central character in your story. Plot. Something happens in your story. And narrative point of view. In literature, that's kind of the tone of the story. In our own lives, you think about that narrative point of view as the thoughts in your head. Who's narrating your day-to-day story? And of all the characters who show up in our story, our narrator is the most influential. So you have to get your narrator on board with what happens next in the story. But the other essential story element that puts every story in motion, you've never read, heard, seen a story without it, is an element that no one likes in their own story. And it's conflict. You have to have conflict to start a story. No one tells a story. Once upon a time, there was a fair maiden who wanted to meet a prince, and she did, and they moved to the castle. Like, that's not a story. Nothing happens.
Short story.
It's a very, very short and unsatisfying story. Conflict is actually a great story driver. So when you're feeling at conflict for something, whether it's too much to do, not enough time, what is my purpose in life, how can I make more money, those are story drivers. But if you don't act on them, your story never gets started.
Wonderful. So speaking of stories, or building on what you just said, what is your formula, Valerie, for owning your career?
So I don't know if there's any formula, but I would say it's an ongoing process. I don't think you ever reach a point where you feel like you're done. I do believe for all of us that there is always a better next chapter. And I think this idea that it has to be this certain way, or there is only one choice to make, is what makes us feel stuck. So if I had any formula, it would be that your career needs to be a continued series of assessments and reactions, and listening to those clues of what you want to do most. If you're the kind of person who works for a paycheck and has a vibrant life outside of work and can manage that balance and doesn't feel like there's something more that you want out of your career, more power to you. My message is for everyone else who feels like they want more. First of all, stop feeling guilty for wanting more. It doesn't mean that we're not grateful for what we have, that we don't recognize that we have a steady job with health benefits, or that we're providing some value. It just means that we believe we are capable of doing more. And so my formula for any type of sustained success is to be in a constant state of evaluation and editing parts of the story that aren't working for you, and thinking about what happens next. And I do have a great technique for that. One of the exercises that I do, Simone, is, most people, when they think about their lives, think in terms of flashbacks, right? We're thinking about things that have already happened. They've shaped our personal narrative. But I think I read somewhere that like 90% of flashbacks are negative. We are far more likely to remember a bad circumstance than a good one. So how does that set up a personal narrative that's going to propel us forward with any positivity? So there's a technique in literature that's less often used called the flash forward. It's when an author takes you forward in time from the current moment of the story to see what happens to the characters down the road before bringing you back to the present moment, kind of like getting a glimpse of the future. And so I do an exercise with workshop participants that allows them to flash forward. What happens 6 months from now, 2 years from now, 10 years from now? Let's build the scene. Where are you? Who are you with? What are you doing? Why is that important to you? And it's sort of like a visualization exercise, but we're actually crafting the story, because once we determine what that might look like, that scene might look like in our flash forward, We then need to talk about the plot points of how we're going to get there.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Valerie, can you think of a time in your career that you avoided responsibility?
Like yesterday when I just wanted to crawl under a blanket and read for the day. I can.
We had snow. Just so our listeners know, we're in the Northeast and we had snow yesterday, so I could totally relate. And it was a Monday.
Yeah, and I will say, Simone, I can do that most days. I don't even need the snow. One of the things I've learned in this next chapter of my life is that I like to work. I can be a workaholic, but I can also exhaust myself, and I need to be intentional about the time that I build in those chasing joy activities in my life. For me, that's reading. In fact, at the really the busiest time of my life, the time when I suffered that really bad burnout, I was so busy and so intent on getting everything done that I stopped doing things that to me didn't seem essential. And reading was one of them. It had been months or even years since I'd read a book. And I missed that. And I know it sounds silly, but when I make the conscious effort now to read for 25 minutes, maybe sometimes even before I start my work, I'm just more content and more focused throughout the rest of the day. So I don't know if that's the same as avoiding responsibilities, but I think it's about being intentional to who you are and what helps provide you the fuel to get through your day. I will say working for yourself is very challenging, as I'm sure you know, without a boss. And after so many years of having a boss and being beholden to a corporate structure, it takes a lot more discipline, I think, to get through daily tasks, especially when there's so much to do. And part of this transition for me into working for myself had to be about learning that there will always be too much to do. You will never get it all done. So learning to focus on what's most important to propel my business and provide value to my clients while also allowing myself time to be a human being and chase a little joy is what helps me not want to hide under the covers and completely avoid responsibility.
Absolutely. And you didn't even throw parenting in there because, that's a big part of it, trying to balance. I know you mentioned you have 2 teenagers, did you say?
2 teenagers. And for all of your listeners who feel like there's just so much going on and there's so much to do and they're not getting any of it right, there is so much going on. There is so much to do. And that's why you are doing it right, because guess what? It's not supposed to be easy. No one has the answers on how to fix the perfect life. All we can do is continue to guide ourselves in the direction we want to go, focus on what's important. And like I said, edit out those things that maybe aren't as important as we're rewriting the story. But I find often people are looking for solutions, easy solutions. And I got to be honest, no one's doing anything wrong. This is what life looks like. And it is messy and it is challenging and conflicts arise when we least expect them. And knowing how to navigate through that, that's actively authoring your story. Waiting for something to happen or waiting for a day when you feel like everything's done and you can move forward, that's just sitting on the same page, reading the same storyline. There is no perfect time. There is no as soon as. You get to build the story daily. What do you want to happen in it? That's what I tell my clients.
So many good titles for your story, Valerie. I just wrote down actively author your story. I love that.
Yes.
I love
well,
that.
that is really my tagline when you think about your career as a story, that serving as its active author means you're the one who holds the pen. You're the one who gets to decide what happens next. And that's a tremendous responsibility and a challenge. And that's why so many of us give away our power. Just tell me what to do. Just tell me how to fix this. Just tell me what comes next, because not knowing the answers feels scary. But if you were to look at your career story like a blank page, we start with, well, what belongs on the page? What do you want to write there? And that's how you learn the tools to begin actively authoring your story. And the second part of my business is very much based on the practical words we use, the communication tools, and everything from how we interview to get the job, how we network, how do we tell our story when someone says, so tell me about yourself, in a way that's of value, how we negotiate for our worth, how we manage change and conflict in the workspace. And that's where I do some of my communications training with corporate groups, bringing together teams talking about career advocacy. How do we take those active authoring skills into feedback sessions, personal reviews, things like that, to build the kind of career and corporate culture that we want? It's one thing, what you say is one thing, how you say it is the important second part.
Absolutely. Well, as we wrap up, you've given us a lot of valuable resources to use during this interview, but I wonder, are there any more resources online or otherwise that you feel would be useful to our listeners in terms of owning their careers?
Well, there's so much great information out there. I think sometimes it can be hard to figure out where to go when there's so much. So I say find a voice that you like. Listeners who are following you, who know what you offer, is putting, to put them in the driver's seat of their career. I can give you 2 follows that I really like. I recently read a book that just floored me by a woman who's pretty well known. Her name is Jen Pastiloff. She is a yoga instructor / storyteller, and her book is called On Being Human. And it is so relatable and so well written about the twists and turns of her career as she managed hearing loss, to years thinking she would only be a waitress, to really sharing stories as a connection tool through her yoga classes. And I just love that book. I also really enjoy Brooke Castillo's The Life Coach School, which is a podcast where I think she's got a lot of great, interesting nuggets, not just for coaches. And of course, they can go to my website, commanderinche.com, and follow my blog, sign up for my monthly newsletter. I blog weekly about everything from work-life balance to career achievement to humor articles about that narrator who lives in your head and how to recast it. I'm also big on sharing quotes, and so I'll leave you with one that's sort of my favorite from one of my favorite writers, Nora Ephron, who said, in the story of your life, always be the heroine, not the victim. Nothing is just happening to you. We can make things happen in our own stories by actively authoring them. So accept the fact that you are your story's heroine. You have great qualities and character flaws, and you are someone worthy of an even better next chapter.
Well said. Well said. I thank you so much for being a guest on the Power of Owning Your Career podcast, Valerie.
Thank you, Simone. And I hope that I would love to get in a car with you anytime and be in the passenger seat with you as the driver. I know you know where you're headed, and you've helped so many people to get where they're headed as well. And I appreciate the time to talk with you today.
Thank you for listening to the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. It is my hope that you enjoyed today's episode. You can check out the show notes for this episode on the SimoneMorrisEnterprises.org website by clicking the podcast menu. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes and tell a friend or 2 about it.